Good morning. Thank you for being here. So I think it's time we talk about our own stories, don't you? And before we get started, I want you to reflect. I want you to just take a moment and reflect on John the Baptist and what he did in announcing the good news. And I want to ask you, while I'm speaking, to kind of reflect in your heart on who was John the Baptist in your own life. Who was John the Baptist in your life, and what did you learn from this person, and how did this person impact your faith journey? And so as we're exploring your own faith story, I want you to reflect on who played the role of John the Baptist in your life. So I'm going to ask you to imagine those terrible hours and days immediately following the crucifixion. And Jesus, your beloved friend, wise teacher, miracle worker, Son of God, has been cruelly executed. And you watched as his broken body was taken down from the cross and placed in a borrowed tomb. And just a short week ago, you heard the crowds welcome him as a king, shouting Hosanna and waving palm branches and throwing their cloaks before his path. And then that crowd became a mob agitating for his execution. And now his mission and yours has ended in a shocking and humiliating death. And so you hide behind locked doors, frightened, defeated, confused. The future seems hopeless and without purpose and meaning. And there seems to be no way out of the pain, no way to overcome the fear, no path forward to claim victory. And so you gather with the other disciples to share your sorrow and your pain and to remember the past. And the door is locked because of fear. And the windows are closed because of apprehension. And when you gaze around the room at the faces of your friends, you see the depth of your own grief reflected in their eyes. And then, in a miracle that you will never understand, no matter how long you live, no matter how wise you grow, you encounter the risen Christ in your midst. You meet Jesus in the breaking of the bread. He walks beside you on the road to Emmaus. He invites you to place your fingers into his pierced hand. And you touch his wounds. And in these actions, your world is transformed. But it doesn't end there, does it? In response to this earth-shattering, soul-shaking, game-changing encounter, you begin to tell stories about that experience. You begin to testify to what you have seen and heard, no matter how impossible it sounds, no matter how unbelievable it is, no matter if anyone believes you or not, and whether they stay or walk away, you begin to testify. And you begin to tell stories of your encounters with Jesus. You tell the stories of your encounters with Jesus during his life and after his resurrection, and you proclaim what you believe about these stories. And you testify to what you have seen and heard, and you declare what you believe about it. Because you know that your encounter with the risen Christ demands a response, and you cannot remain silent. Your life has been changed, and you can't stay still. And as the disciples begin to share these stories with each other, and then with the people that they met in the marketplace, in the synagogue, along the roadways, they transformed from a small group of bewildered men and women, defeated, failed, lost in grief and self-pity, huddled in the darkness, into a bold and dynamic and fearless team that defied the power of the Roman Empire. And the rocket fuel launching this growth were these two related events: an encounter with our risen Lord and a response to that encounter in the form of personal witness. And we need to see these two things as flip sides of the same coin: encounter and personal witness. They should be seen as inseparable. And Christianity spread in those early days not through lectures or theology classes or consumable workbooks, not through seminary programs or catechetical training sessions. Christianity spread not through strategic planning or clever marketing, but through the everyday witness of ordinary people, young and old, sophisticated and simple, educated and untutored, powerful and meek, saint and sinner, people just like you and me, people who met Jesus and could no longer remain silent. And what they discovered is that when one person speaks hope into another, it ignites a spark that continues to burn even on the darkest days. It lights a fire that continues to give warmth even in the cold. And sharing your testimony is like opening the core of a nuclear reactor. It generates this chain reaction that cannot be stopped. And it spreads the good news one person at a time. The only way that really works, one person at a time, story by story, witness by witness, living stone against living stone. Pope St. Paul VI, one of my personal heroes in ministry, said this: "The world believes witnesses more than teachers. And if it believes teachers, it is because they were first witnesses." In other words, witness comes before teaching. Testimony precedes doctrine. Our mission to rebuild the church, our witness, our personal proclamation of the good news as we've experienced in our own lives, becomes the foundation for all lectures, all teachings, all catechisms, all doctrine. And witness is simply this: I have met Jesus, and this is what I believe about that meeting. And this witness is indispensable to evangelization, to community building, to helping new generations come to faith. And when we lose sight of this, we diminish. When we forget this, our own people forget their faith. And when we forget this, our people live without hope. Testimony is simple. We try to make it hard, but testimony is as simple as this: I tell you the story of an encounter I had with Jesus, who met me in my despair, or who caught me when I fell, or who walked with me through the desert, or who laughed with me in my joy, or who created the beauty of nature for me to embrace and love, or who appears to me every time I receive the Eucharist. And I tell you this simple story, and I share what I believe about it, and then I give you space to respond in your own way, in your own time, and from your own experience. So remember the story of Jacob in the Hebrew Scriptures? So Jacob and his brother Esau were twins, but Esau was the oldest. But Jacob was his mama's favorite. And so they both wanted their father's blessing and inheritance. And Jacob's mother colluded with him to steal that blessing from Esau. And although his scheme worked, it so enraged Esau to the point that Jacob had to flee for his life. And so Jacob left with little more than the clothes on his back, and he walked as far as he could into the wilderness, and he looked around for a stone that he could use as a pillow. And when he found one, he lay down to sleep, and he began to dream. And he dreamed that a ladder came down from heaven to earth, and angels were ascending and descending this ladder. And God appeared to Jacob in this dream and promised him that he would gain land and children and blessing. And God said, I am with you until I have done what I have promised you. And so Jacob awoke, and the wilderness was still all around him. There were rocks and dry soil and emptiness and clouds in the sky. And yet, now Jacob knew that this emptiness was filled with the presence of God. And he knew that this encounter with God was as real and as concrete as the stone pillow under his head. And Jacob said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. And he set up a pillar to mark the place of his encounter. And a wonderful preacher, a great preacher, Barbara Brown Taylor, an Episcopalian, said this. She said, but if we were to set up pillars everywhere where there has been an encounter with God, we could not move a millimeter without banging our shins, right? Because our lives and our earth are literally filled with places where someone has encountered God. And so it is for us. Look around you. You have been promised an inheritance by your Father. You have been promised blessing. And the very air around you, the dirt under your feet, is filled with the presence of God. And can you say with Jacob, surely the Lord is in this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this in front of me right now is the gate to heaven. Testifying to our encounters with God begin with opening our eyes and seeing and feeling and listening. And seeing, the kind of seeing that we're talking about, is different than just looking. Seeing requires attentiveness. It's an active seeing. It's an openness. It's a seeing with the expectation that I am going to see something. It requires paying attention to the shadows as well as the light, because sometimes God is a bit hidden as well as revealed, and God can be found in our sorrowful times as well as our joyful. It requires listening, which is more than just hearing. Listening is also attentiveness. Listening is an act of hospitality and justice, and it's active, not passive, and it requires energy and time. And we listen because we expect to hear something. And it requires feeling. It requires leaning into our feelings, whether those feelings are happy or sad or socially unacceptable. It requires an openness to feeling what we feel and acknowledging that. The angel in Revelation says to the Apostle John, write in the book what you see. Write in the book what you see. And the angel is inviting us to look, to listen, and to reflect, and to remember what we see and feel and experience. And once we open ourselves to that, it's amazing what we begin to see and hear in front of us. I have become convinced of the transformative power of personal testimony because I have seen its fruits in my own life. And I'll be honest, I didn't used to like testimony and witness. As some of you know, I grew up in Oklahoma in a very Protestant culture that was big on testimony, really, really big on testimony. You know, pep club girls in the back of the bus on the way to the Putnam City Pirates football game leading a Jesus cheer in the back of the bus. You know, old men standing up in prayer meetings and testifying to their epic battles with good and evil. The pressure to be ready to give a witness wherever you are, whether it's Tuesday afternoon at the Jiffy Lube or Wednesday morning at your piano lesson. And this landed uncomfortably on me. But as I grew in faith and understanding, I began to realize that if we want to rebuild the church, we must first recapture the wisdom of those early disciples who shared their stories with the world. And so I began. And I wasn't very good at it at first. It felt awkward, and it felt uncomfortable, and it felt, frankly, quite weird. But I began this adventure in testimony, and it has produced interesting fruits. I began to teach my lay ministry students to offer testimony, and I saw how it enriched their lives and their ministry, and how it blessed their journey. And I'll be honest, I don't have big stories to tell. I don't have a dramatic conversion story. I've never seen a miracle cure. I don't hear the voice of God whispering in my ears. I don't have prophetic visions. I have faced sorrow and brokenness, and I have had more than my share of questions about faith, even dark nights of the soul. I have lived a very ordinary life, but along the way, this is what I've learned. An ordinary life is an extraordinary gift when we live it in the light of faith. I've felt the love of family and friends who have extended me mercy and forgiveness, even when I don't deserve it. I have found the courage to hold on to gritty hope and claim victory, even as the world has announced my defeat. I have walked in the desert, and I've felt a gracious presence walking beside me. I have met Jesus in the Eucharist even when I am unworthy, and because of this, I have lived an extraordinary life. And if you have ever said yes to Jesus, if you have ever felt his presence beside you or his comfort, if you have encountered his love in the beauty of nature, or in friendship, or in the love of family, if you have ever been forgiven, if you have ever known joy or comfort in sorrow, you have also lived an extraordinary life. As I work with people on crafting their personal testimony, they often ask me, what if I speak heresy? What if I say something wrong? What if I make a mistake? Don't I have to learn all of the theological words? Don't I have to understand doctrine? Don't I have to polish up my life to a high gloss? Maybe I can do this after I sweep the dust bunnies of my life under the rug. And I'm here to say, no, you don't have to do that. In reflecting on our experience, it is true that sometimes we have to wrestle with the parts of our stories we don't like. We would prefer to give the world an edited, curated, Facebooked, Pinterest version of our story, the story that is cleaned up and shiny and bright and all tied up with a designer bow. A story that places us in a really, really good light. But the truth is, it's the parts of our story that we want to edit out. It's the mistakes, the failures, the times we missed the mark, the times we needed forgiveness. Those are often the very parts of our story that make our story worth reflecting on. And the power of testimony lies in sharing your authentic experience, warts and all. And for most of us, our testimony will include moments of joy and blessing and hope, as well as times of pain and loss and failure, and even doubt. But we have the promise that because God is in it, our lives have value and meaning, because our stories are caught up and redeemed in the gospel story. And because we are Christians, our journey will always lead us again and again and again to the foot of the cross, because the cross is never behind us on our journey, but always, always located somewhere in front of us. And there is such great comfort in knowing that we don't have to lead a perfect life to have a perfect testimony. In fact, when we take our own story out into the wounded world, it might just be those times in our lives that show our human weakness and the power of God's forgiveness that become the entry points for other people to enter into a relationship with God. It is very often the times that we have questioned and struggled that become invitations for other people to see that there is room for them in God's story too. Perfection may be pretty on paper, but it doesn't help us relate to sinners. And let's be real, that's all of us. If we only share our success, our victory, our curated perfection, how will the people who are lost and struggling believe that there is a place for them here in your community? How will the people who are broken and searching know that there is room for them at the table, there is a place for them at this table, if we don't share the honest truth of our lives and our stories? St. John Paul II said this: "The truth of Christian revelation is found in Jesus of Nazareth, and this enables all men and women to embrace the mystery of their own lives. And it is this mystery that forms the basis of our witness, the mystery of our own lives." Isn't that a wonderful image? And so when we witness or testify, we place the mystery of our own lives and experience into the Paschal mystery. We place our own story into conversation with the gospel story and explore where and how they connect. And sometimes I love to think of the image of all of the disciples through the millennia, our stories intertwining and connecting. You know, our stories connecting with the story of the Good Samaritan, the story of the woman with the hemorrhage, the story of the bent-over woman and the Gerasene demoniac and the prodigal son, in these wonderful, complex net that stretches across the universe, connecting us with all of the host of God's storytellers who have walked before us. And we are all walking together on that Emmaus road, telling our stories. I love that image. And what I've learned along the way is that while testimony is simple, it isn't always easy. I won't lie, it's a little bit risky. It requires that we step out in faith, not knowing if the ledge is kind of still standing under our feet, but trust me, it is, even when we can't see it. Sharing our testimony can sometimes lead to embarrassment or vulnerability or to questions that we can't answer. It will send us out. It will invite us to look at our experience through new eyes. It will probably take us outside of our comfortable space, and it may lead us to encounter people and situations that are new and challenging. And we may worry how our words will be received, and with good reason. If we witness hoping for positive affirmation, we may be disappointed, because witnessing doesn't usually lead to immediate affirmation or praise or conversion. Rather, sometimes it leads to dead silence or blank stares or polite murmurs. So we may wonder if our words even made a difference. But what we're doing when we share our stories is we are sowing seeds. And like all farmers, we don't know if those seeds are going to germinate or not, because the harvest is not up to us, right? We are not called to harvest. We are simply called to scatter seeds. And we may never know the impact our words have on someone else, but they can and do invite, they can and do encourage and uplift to those who are seeking, and they can impact and take root long after our words no longer echo. So when we offer our testimony, when we share a personal story with somebody, we are cooperating with God and with the church in the great mission of evangelization. And that mission is our responsibility. It's not the clergy, it's not the parish staff, it's not the bishop, it's us, you and me. That is the role of the laity in the world, and Pope St. Paul VI makes that very clear. That's our job. That's our job, it's our responsibility. And if we do not grasp this work, it simply will not get done. The Mass says, go. Basically, the end of the Mass says, go. You can't stay here. Go out into the world. Having been fed, now you must go feed. And in this mission, we are not converting people. It's not our job description to transform people. We don't have that power. That's the work of God and God alone. And we don't bring people to Christ with our witness. Christ is already there. Christ is already working in that person, longing for a relationship. But what we do when we share our testimony, it's like when we take our phone or a device and we look at it from one angle and it appears to be completely blank. And yet when we angle it, when we turn it just a little bit, we see the smudges and the fingerprints on the surface. And so testimony angles a lens, allowing us and others to see the fingerprints of God that mark each moment of our lives. And then we share that perspective with others. And it invites them to angle a lens on their own life and to discover for themselves where God has placed God's fingerprints. And by connecting our story with God's story, our testimony can help other people see that their lives have larger meaning too, that their lives reflect a narrative that is caught up into God's narrative. So many people in our broken world, including many, many people of faith, live disjointed, fragmented, and disconnected lives. They view their experience, when they reflect on it at all, as a series of random, isolated, unconnected, perhaps even meaningless episodes, rather than a rich tapestry, laden with meaning and woven into the paschal mystery of Christ's life, death, and resurrection. So our testimony is never a statement of private holiness, but it is something proclaimed for the good of the larger community, particularly for the good of someone who might be struggling or searching or lost or burdened by pain, and helping people see that their stories are a vital chapter of God's own story is an incredible, generous, transformative gift that we can offer. And if you and I don't do this, who will? Perhaps it may help to know that someone out there is waiting for what you uniquely have to share. Someone out there needs to hear the gospel story that only you can tell. Because here's the thing, people don't fall in love with doctrine or rules or catechisms or admonitions about sin and morality. People fall in love with a person, the person of Jesus. And it's in viewing life and faith through the lens of that love that makes the rules and the doctrine and the law make sense. And so it matters that you show up. It matters that you are saying yes to God. It matters that you are here. It matters that you go to Mass. It matters that you pray, even if you struggle to find the words sometimes. It matters that you have a life story, no matter what that life story is, whether it is in a minor key or a major key or filled out with flats and sharps or four-part harmony. It matters that you have a story to share. It matters to God, and it matters to this community, and it particularly matters to all of those people out there who do not yet know God. So, how do you begin? It helps if you begin small. Begin with one small, specific, concrete experience, incident, insight, and then begin to reflect on that deeply. And then you simply begin to tell that experience to others. And like a ripple on a quiet lake, this reflective exercise can expand outward, leading us to deeper and deeper reflections on the mystery of our life. And if we do this kind of reflection regularly, we can begin to see that our lives are unfolding as part of the gospel story. And it can help us connect what at first seemed to be small, unimportant incidences into a meaningful and rich narrative. And it can lead us to see how our own stories, as ordinary as they seem at first glance, collide with the gospel story in amazing and inspiring ways. And that gives us the confidence to share our stories in the community. This is really a form of theological reflection, and it is the work of doing theology, and it is our work as laymen and women. When we stop to reflect on our experience in the light of faith, it almost always leads to new insights, new understanding, and a new awareness of the movement of God in our lives. So you can focus on a specific moment or experience. You might center on a scripture passage. Maybe you have a favorite scripture passage and you just want to explore, why is that so important to me? You can focus on a particular sacramental moment that was powerful for you, or an experience of prayer that touched you in a particular way. You can center your reflection on a spiritual insight, one of those aha moments where you had a deep connection with the created world or with an experience. My story that I shared on the first night at Moonstone Beach, that was one of those aha moments for me. And I spent a lot of time reflecting and unpacking, why was that experience so powerful to me? Okay? What you're searching for as you reflect on a concrete time, you're searching for something concrete and specific, not something generic and vague. It does not have to be a dramatic experience. In fact, most of our encounters with Christ are ordinary. Most of our encounters with the movement of God in our lives are so ordinary that we often don't recognize them as graced until we look back and remember and reflect, and we say, with Jacob, surely God is here in this wilderness. So it could be a moment of awe or gratitude or thanksgiving. Could be a moment of comfort or healing. It could be a sense of forgiveness or mercy or restoration. Could be a feeling of unconditional love or a time when you were surprised by joy. It could be a sacramental experience that has lingered in your memory for some reason. It could be that you felt surprising strength one time in overcoming sin or temptation. Or it could be a moment of finding hope in the midst of despair. So I'm going to give you a moment or two, and I invite you to think in silence, to reflect on a specific and concrete moment in your life. And here's a secret about offering testimony. Once that moment bubbles to the surface, quit looking. Quit searching for another better experience and just stop and reflect on that one. Okay, so take a moment. Once that moment has bubbled to the surface, I want you to now reflect on it. So cut to the heart of the matter. Most effective testimonies are short and succinct. So reflect on what lies at the heart of this experience. What does it feel like and look like? Where did you sense the movement of God in this particular experience, and what did it teach you? What did it teach you? What did you learn about God or about faith or about the church or about yourself in this moment? Is there a particular scripture passage or character in the Bible or in the communion of saints that comes to mind? So take a moment and reflect on the heart of this experience. as you continue to reflect on this in the coming days, you're going to kind of edit it and shape it. You want to make it brief and real and authentic. And you want to find a way to share it in vivid words, in action verbs and descriptive words. And you want to claim what it teaches you about God today. Tomorrow may bring different insights because our testimony is never static. It's always evolving. It's always changing as our lives change and our perspective changes and our wisdom grows. Our testimony and our story always includes what we believe about our encounter with Christ. And no matter how difficult our story may be, it always ends in a word of hope. Our Christian testimony always ends in a word of hope, because Calvary ended in Easter morning. So as you continue to think upon this incident or this situation that you would like to share as a testimony, are there any invitations or challenges that you hear, and how would you respond to those? Is there a primary theme emerging in this particular incident that you began to reflect on, such as grace or hope or mercy or relationship or restoration, forgiveness? If you were to give this incident a title, what would it be? And what does this tell you about God? One of my professors once said, the most important theological question that we can ask is, so what? So what? So what does this mean? What difference does this make? So what did I learn? And so you prayerfully continue to think about this incident, and I'm going to challenge you to continue to reflect on the incident that surfaced or the experience that surfaced. Continue to reflect on it, continue to kind of edit it in your mind, to come to the heart of the matter, and then challenge yourself to share that story with someone within the next week. I've learned we need to give ourselves tight deadlines, because otherwise it just kind of always stretches out into infinity. I'll do that someday. But I'm going to challenge you to do that sometime within the next week, and to think about how you might tell someone this experience. So you have to think about who might benefit from hearing this story, and where and how might I share it? How might this encounter inspire or comfort or uplift someone else? So if it's a story about finding God's abiding presence in the midst of grief and sorrow, you might find an opportunity to share it with somebody who is experiencing that same dynamic of loss and pain. If it's a witness about how you experience the deep love of God in the Eucharist, you might look for an opportunity to share your story with someone who is struggling with faith, or someone who has left the church but is still searching. If your story is about the power of forgiveness and what you learned when you either forgave someone or were forgiven, perhaps you'll find an opportunity to speak hope into someone who believes they are beyond mercy. Trust this truth. Someone needs to hear your story. Someone needs the unique gospel story that only you can share. So think of testimony as an ongoing conversation with God, with the community, and with others. And our testimony is always carried out in a spirit of respect for the beliefs and the experience of the listener. It's never just a one-sided, let me tell you something about God. And it's certainly never lecturing or apologetics or debate or shaming. But our witness is rooted in a deep love for God's people and a listening for the needs of the other person. And it takes place in the midst of conversation and dialogue that is gracious and open and rooted in hospitality. Our testimony is always rooted in a stance of gratitude, and it's dynamic and ever-changing, because even if we share the same experience with two different people, we are not going to have the same insights, nor are our listeners going to have the same needs. Testimony is a bit like a free-range chicken. It's not dependent on permission, ordination, theology degrees, status, age, gender, education. It's open to everyone, young and old, male and female, powerful, marginalized, struggling, sinner, saint, seeker. It is rooted in baptism and the priesthood of all believers, and it is the most ancient form of preaching. And it connects us directly to the early disciples who set the world on fire with their stories of faith. You and I may not be another Peter or Mary or the Apostle Paul, but if we are seeking God, we have something powerful to share that the world needs to hear. Maybe it's something big, like forgiveness or healing or a miracle. Or maybe it's something small, so fragile, so ordinary, that it's only visible to the person who is truly searching. Once we become attentive to the movement of God in our lives, we start to see that God's fingerprints are everywhere. And sharing that can make all of the difference to you and to someone who's listening. Our lives intersect the gospel in amazing ways, and when we say yes to Jesus in baptism and in confirmation, in adoration, in the Eucharist, we lose the right to remain silent. We no longer get to stand on the sidelines or sit on the back row hoping that we're just invisible. When we say yes to Jesus, we cannot hide. We cannot remain silent because in this beautiful, fragile, hungry, broken world, your life story might be the only scripture someone else reads, and you do not have the right to keep that book shut. Even if you don't have all the answers, even if you struggle to find the right words, even if you feel embarrassed or awkward or weird, you have something powerful to say. And our testimonies remind us that we are holy people, not perfect people, but holy people, beloved of God. Remove the sandals from your feet, God tells Moses, out in the middle of the wilderness, because the place on which you're standing is holy ground. And so God's presence is all that's required to turn desert sand into holy ground. God's presence is all that is required to turn the straw in the manger into the birthplace of our Lord. And God's presence is all that's required to make our own lives holy. The times when I have taken a risk, the times when I have shared my testimony or spoken a word of hope into a stranger who seemed to need it, God never left me hanging. God met me in that work, giving me courage, giving me words, blessing both of us in ways I cannot count. One thing to remember on this journey of testimony is that we can't prove our stories of faith. We can't document the times that Jesus has met us in our experience. There's no notary seal that stamps our work as guaranteed or authentic. We have no power over how our witness is received. The only proof lies in our sincerity, in our trustworthiness, in our conviction that we have met Jesus on this journey and that we believe we are changed because of that. People have the right to listen, to accept, to reject, or to walk away. But what happens is when we share our testimony, it holds a mirror up to our own lives, challenging us to live a life worth speaking about, challenging us to create stories worth sharing. So testimony invites us to live what we speak. And there is an urgency to this. The church needs what we have to offer, and God is calling us to share our stories now. Even when we don't feel ready, even if we have more questions than answers, God is calling us to share the truth that He loves us, even when we cry ugly and forget to use our indoor voices. And we can rebuild the church through our stories, yours and mine, yours and mine, as ordinary as they are. But take heart. As the angels said to the shepherds in the fields outside of Bethlehem, "Do not be afraid. We were created for this." As I shared on the first day of our mission, ongoing neurological and biological studies are showing that deep within our DNA and hardwired into our synapses, embedded in our bones, is a hunger for story. And we are created as story-shaped people to thrive on stories that have meaning and significance. And we are people of story, and our communities come alive with hope and joy and connection when we share our stories with each other, and the church grows when we go out, as Pope Francis has invited us to do, to the crossroads and meet people where they are and share our stories of faith. The neurological and biological changes in our brains and body on story lowers barriers of resistance. It fosters relationship, and it generates hope, and it builds community. Testimony reminds us that our stories are part of God's story, living stone by living stone. And when we become communities of faith that tell our stories to each other and to strangers, we create a space in which differences become blessings rather than challenges, and diversities become strength. In my work, I have seen the power of personal testimony shared in public spaces. And my experience tells us that the world is hungry for what ordinary followers of Jesus have to say about faith. And I believe it is the way we will rebuild the church, because it is the way the church was built originally. Your story can remind people that God still appears among us, opening locked doors, meeting us on the Emmaus Road, becoming present to us in the Eucharist. And your testimony can give people hope that Jesus is still alive in our midst, still at work in our lives, even in those times we cannot see or hear him clearly. I begin by asking you, who was John the Baptist in your life? And I would ask you to just name that person out loud. Just everybody at once, name that person out loud. Often it was our parents, our nanas, our teachers. But someone was John the Baptist in your life, or you would not be here today. And now my question for you is, for whom will you be John the Baptist? Whose way will you prepare? To whom will you announce the good news? The biblical story, which is about redemption and transformation and love beyond all telling, is a story immensely larger than ourselves, and yet it is intimate, close enough that our story matters. In fact, the great story of God is not complete without your personal story. It is not complete without your voice added to the choir. And in this great narrative, God continues to ask, "Who shall I send? Who will go for us?" And God is waiting to hear us respond, "Here I am, Lord, send me." So thank you for your presence here. Over the past week, it has been a true blessing in my life to spend the last few days with you. I'm getting a little choked up, but thank you for being here. If you have anything you would like to share or discuss or any questions, I'll be at the back, and I'd love to talk to you. May God bless you today.